Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Better Satellite World, the podcast of Space and Satellite Professionals International. I'm Lou Zaccarella. In April, we began a discussion around the complex topic of public-private partnerships. We continue it today for the next few weeks. We want to know whether the current structures for scalable, collaborative technology ventures in commercial space are moving forward quickly enough, and whether the methods that fund and feed these partnerships are adequate for the times ahead. Because as they say in real estate, space is expensive. We invited three people who will give you insights on how to create space for space and enable those relationships. This series, Making Space for Space, the new public-private partnership, is brought to you by Artel, Connecting with Confidence. The Better Satellite World podcast is funded in part by the corporate partners of SSPI, Northrop Grumman, EchoStar Hughes, Access Intelligence, and the law firm of K&L Gates. Additional support comes from the 3,000 members of SSPI and its chapters worldwide. Thank you, SSPI. Let me introduce our guests. Dave Bettinger is the CEO of SpaceLink Corporation. SpaceLink is a subsidiary of Australia's Electro-Optical Systems, providing data relay services for satellites in low Earth orbit. Jay Gullish is the Senior Director for Digital Economy, Media, and Entertainment at the U.S.-India Business Council. Along with his colleagues in India, he is the founder of SSPI's India chapter. Mr. Gullish has passionately promoted digital development in over 20 countries. Jayatsna Jayaram is the law partner in the Bangalore office of Trilegal, part of the TMT practice group. She has wide transactional and advisory experience in the tech and telecom space. Her core areas of expertise include commercial contracts. Ms. Jayaram is an alumnus of the School of Law, Christ University in Bangalore. They join me today to kick off the series Space for Space. Welcome.
Hi, Lou. Great to be here.
Thank you all for having me as well.
Well, again, it's always great to have you guys here. Let's talk first about the challenge of building a commercial space ladder and infrastructure with the current private partner structure that we have, as well as the financial and regulatory structures that you guys know very well. I just came from root canal, and there are probably some equivalencies here. My first question is, are they suited to the ambitions and the realities ahead? Dave, let's look at it first from your total industry experience. For example, has the ground segment caught up? And put it within the context of that question, if you would.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, and I must admit my exposure to PPPs has been limited, but actually quite recently getting more extensive. So going back to my days at OneWeb, we of course were a U.S. based company, but doing a lot of business in the United Kingdom. We had actually courted the European Space Agency to develop a public-private partnership for some of the advanced technologies that we were going to work on for our next generation. Mm-hmm. In fact, that program is still living on today. But my best knowledge of the PPPs comes from my recent experience here at SpaceLink. SpaceLink, as you'd mentioned, we are trying to put up a medium Earth orbit constellation of initially 4 satellites that will be providing data relay services from our clients, which are other LEO-based space assets that need connectivity, and the ground. And it's something that's quite interesting because NASA actually operates today their TDRS system, which is the telecommunication data, the tracking and data relay satellite system that provides a similar type of services. So NASA is currently in this business. They have been in the data relay business for the past, let's say 20 years or more, but they have recognized that it's time for them to take advantage of the cost efficiencies that are happening on the commercial side And so they are in fact getting out of the TDRS business and looking for commercial service providers such as SpaceLink to be able to take up that slack when they get out of it by 2030. And their method for doing this is called the Space Act Agreement. So NASA is actually, I think, one of the best U.S. based agencies that has really done a good job of creating public-private partnerships for the purpose of commercializing some of what they're trying to do. The Space Act Agreement is the vehicle in which they do it, and it's it's a public document. You can look and make sure that it's a legal contract that you're willing to get into, so you know what you're getting to ahead of time. It's common to everybody. There's very few changes for Space Act agreements, and there's a lot of success. They've done over 1,100 Space Act agreements with U.S. partners, and another 500 that have been done with international partners. Some of the ones that make the press quite often are the Commercial Orbit Transportation System, which is used to resupply the International Space Station from U.S. soil, which SpaceX and Orbital Science are now north of Grumman operate. And then, of course, recently the successes on the Commercial Crew Program, which is being able to launch astronauts, humans, from U.S. soil. We had been dependent on the Soyuz and Russian launches for a number of years after the space shuttle went away. And now SpaceX and soon Boeing will be doing that from a commercial sense. And those are all done under, the public-private partnerships through the Space Act Agreement. The ones that will impact SpaceLink directly that we're quite excited about are the Communication Services Program, which again is, as TDRS takes itself out of service, we are actually looking to be able to take advantage of a PPP through a Space Act agreement to provide services to NASA for their various missions, as well as making a commercial business out of it. So we find that to be a very good avenue for us to be able to not only hopefully get a good anchor customer for our system, but also a relatively straightforward and no root canal here, Lou, I think is what I'm saying. We've actually been quite pleased with the recent experience with that. We'll see, it's a process, but so far I'm quite positive.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Dave. And that's that's very thorough, and it kind of sets the table for us today. And I want to come back to you on how SpaceLink is going to take further advantage of it, and what the business plan is, the mission, and of course the value to the customers. Jay, you've been listening to this, and of course, you work very closely with national governments and collaborative bodies like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. More of a macro question to you to start. Is it your view that national leaders, legislators, and agencies like NASA broadly are suited for the types of things that Dave was sort of laying out for us for the future ahead?
Yeah, Lou. Well, first, thank you for letting me join this conversation. The area of public-private partnerships, I think, is really critical because it really allows a larger stakeholder community to come together, bring their various strengths together so that there's an ultimate, objective. Where I like to start with public-private partnerships is with the definition, because not everybody thinks about it in the same way, and there's a little bit of a continuum. When a government first starts this public-private partnership, they often have a very different thinking about it as they go through a series of programs, and the whole concept evolves over a long period of time. In some instances, governments refer to a public-private partnership in a way that's just sort of a straightforward commercial contract where the government is working with companies that maybe provide some technology or even some funding, but really isn't a true public-private partnership in the sense that you're optimizing the relationship in a way where the government comes to the table and brings those things that governments do well, and then industry and others come to the table and bring what they do well. So, so just to give a little context to that, something
Hmm.
that governments do that, private sector doesn't do in many instances is scientific discovery. There's a lot of activities that, only governments are going to do, whether that's for the reasons of exploration or scientific advancement. It may be too expensive, and it may be a very niche technology that only has government applications. And that would suggest that it's not really a good marketplace for public-private, relationship. You could flip the table, and around the world, there are a number of governments that continue to maintain and invest in truly commercial operations, particularly in SATCOM, but in other areas as well, where they're actually using government funding that could otherwise receive private investment. And in actuality, they're crowding out, commercial interests. So finding that right balance between governments is going to and industry and other civil society, it's a fluid situation, and it's going to change over time, and it's going to change from country to country. NASA in particular and the U.S. government really is ahead of this area. They've been looking at public-private partnerships in a number of areas where whether it's low Earth orbit, satellite communications, or the TDRS model, or if it's comms and navs in the lunar environment. And they're really trying to bring to the table an overall program that will optimize this situation. And what we see now is that, markets in the past that may have been particularly government driven, over time have become almost entirely commercial. SATCOM is the perfect example of that.
Yes.
And where perhaps human space flight is somewhere in the middle, and there are other markets elsewhere. And so to take an India perspective, India is just starting its space journey right now from a commercial space point of view. And so the way they think about a lot of these public-private partnerships are probably what the way NASA thought about them, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And as they start to get more involved, they'll change their sort of definition and thinking of how to engage the private sector and other stakeholders. So, to sort of conclude, I think that there's, NASA continuously is looking at new markets that they can, or new technology areas, new applications or new missions where they can actually extract themselves and really focus on things that the private sector won't necessarily do. And in the same way, they support the private sector and it allows them to expand into new markets that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to.
Right.
Human space flight, or perhaps a mission to Mars is something like that, or communications relay is something in that arena. And so in that way, they've really empowered the American private sector to think about new markets and get into, and created a good structure, architecture, open communications to really figure this out. And the Space Act agreement that Dave mentioned really allows companies and the governments to come together in sort of I don't want to say informal because it's a formal process, but it allows them to talk in a way that's not a formalized contract in the initial stage, allows both parties to bring their various capabilities and financing and really sort of work through the nuances and the details of trying to figure out ultimately successful public-private partnerships.
Yeah, thanks, Jay, for that. There also, as I understand it, at NASA, before I jump to Jyotsna, there's a technology transfer office as well, which, as I understand it, and Jay and Dave pick me up on this, actually takes a lot of the technologies that, for the purpose of description, are sitting on the shelf at NASA. They've been developed for the various ventures all the way back to Apollo, but they get transferred off. The NASA actively seeks commercial and even municipal entities, I know, to look at these technologies to see if they can use them. Sort of the government, giving back some of the investment. Is that something that fits into this overall picture? And I'll Jay, let me ask you that, then I'll jump
Sure.
back to Dave quickly, then we'll go on to Jyotsna.
Yeah, technology is an aspect of that. And many times the governments create technology that they use for their own missions, and then they want to expand it out. And finding that right mechanism to do so is really hard because so much of the technology really is often, mission specific. And finding those types of people that can translate one technology to another marketplace or product It's a really difficult process.
Yeah.
NASA and other governments, they do a reasonably good job of it. And the government of India is looking at a lot more tech transfer as well. Where it's most effective is not in sort of technology that's either on paper or in the shelf in sort of some back room. It's where it's either been recently utilized or it's an actively being used and then being transferred to a market where the government, or an operation where the government is no longer interested in being the driving force and being a partner.
Right.
And so that's really where I would look at. If you look at places where governments are looking to recede and the technology that support those missions, it's active, it's real technology, it's up to date. Those are going to be the ones that's going to be most effective. Just when you just think about, standards and the equipment used and replacement parts, things that have been recently used or are on the sort of tail end of their government purpose. That's where I think the most value lies for the commercial sector to then take that, update it, and invest in it. I do also want to add that there's another element here. We always think of innovation as purely a technical innovation, and there are a lot of other innovations out there. What governments do really well are things like risk management and programmatics, those sorts of things. Yeah, and there's a lot of skill sets. There's a lot of intellectual capital in there. There's a lot of know-how. And so I just encourage people to think about, these public-private partnerships and tech transfer. Think about it in the broadest way, because it's not always just a black box or some code. It's a lot of processes and things that can be really useful for the private sector to use going forward.
Yeah. So this is Dave. I agree with Jay significantly in that, I've never throughout my career, and again, it's going on 30 years now, have not had a specific transfer of technology granted to what I've been working on. However, that being said, it's all of the standards and research work and advances that NASA has made in space over the past 60 years that have led to a lot of the commercialization of products and systems that I've certainly been a part of. So I've never specifically worked with the technology transfer office, but I've definitely been on the receiving end of the benefits of having technology come out of what NASA has been working on and other organizations as well.
Right. Just quick question for you then, Dave. Has SpaceLink, either from NASA or anyone else, taken some of these technologies that are out there and from the government, say, and introduced it to develop the kinds of cost efficiencies that you were referring to at the outset?
No, it's more of, like SpaceLink will be, one of the leaders in utilizing optical laser-based communications from spacecraft to spacecraft. And again, it's not something that we've invented ourselves. We're using it in a unique way, but there's been a lot of development over the past decades that have led to us being able to utilize optical intersatellite links. And a lot of that development and research initially has come out of NASA. But no, we have not taken any direct technology transfer and commercialize it. That's something we have not had the pleasure of doing yet.
Right.
Lou, if I may jump in, it's also, we've been thinking about a lot of these transfers being within industry, but more often than not, they're across industry. It's the Tang example. Maybe that's a bad example, but there's so much risk management and autonomy and drone technology that has been developed by NASA, but then has been applied to other sorts of very complex engineering tasks, disaster management, and other sectors. So the same types of things that NASA was using to safely manage the shuttle actually had a lot of implications in deep water oil exploration or in some of the autonomy types of things going on elsewhere. So that foundational information, technology, processes, risk management is all very valuable across the broader, digital economy.
Got it. Well, thank you both. Jayatsna, you've been waiting patiently, and I know it's late at night where you are, and you just put a little one to bed. So hopefully you're still awake, because
very much. And I'm completely tuned. And Jay and Dave have done a really good job.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Jay referred to nuances. You can, get a sense of what Dave's trying to accomplish with the SpaceLink venture. From where you sit, from the legal side, are to my original question again, are collaborative ventures, funding mechanism contracts, and regulatory regimes, are all of those things that are traditionally part of the domain, are they agile enough to truly launch the kind of commercial space marketplace that we've been describing here?
As they stand today, Lou, I would think not. But I must say that in terms of the messaging and what the government has been speaking about quite extensively on the reforms and opening up of the space sector, it does seem like the ambitions and sort of the forecasting is in the right place, and they know where they want to get. But unfortunately, what's happened with space, which I guess every government wants to have some sort of strategic control over, is that it is still heavily centralized with the government arm here. And so any sort of participation from the private sector, to my mind, is constrained on two accounts. One is because we don't simply have a regulatory framework that enables the role of private players as co-travelers in that sense, because it doesn't provide a level playing field. Even if the sector is opened up, it is still subject to several limitations in terms of what you can do. It is approval heavy. And at all times, you find that you're folding into a more of a supportive role, which is currently what exists today, and supportive role to the ISRO in India. And as far as PPP is concerned, and this is something that is pretty close to my heart, because several clients that I advise, are just actively looking out, for opportunities to collaborate with the government, often find that the only option that they're left with is to fall into the supply chain role, the traditional supplier vendor model, which we haven't really moved away from. And the other real benefit with PPP, and I think Jay sort of spoke about this, is if it is truly symbiotic. But what happens here is any sort of private participation is limited to what ISRO and its commercial arm is currently carrying out. And what they do specialize in is rocket and satellite launch services, where everybody else has gone ahead. So any sort of participation, again, then is going to be limited to this. And I don't know whether then the regulatory structures that we have right now and that we intend to put in place will fully allow us to optimize what the space does have to offer.
Yeah. And again, Jay can talk to that endlessly as well, because he's been pushing for that to change. But let me ask you, Jayatsna, you mentioned the way it works in India with regard to the ISRO model. I mean, there's an 800-pound gorilla and there's an 8,000-pound gorilla, and that would be ISRO, the 8,000-pound gorilla, the way I look at it. Are there international models that you would, let's say, implement if you were a legislator, or if you were Dave Bettinger and a CEO, talking to regulators and legislators and his colleagues? Do you have a best practices out there that you look at?
Yeah, I would. And I think it's sort of a multi-pronged approach. And the first thing that you need to do is really equip the players with some capital. And I think only if you open up foreign investment that allows a free flow of capital to be able to carry out all of these activities and truly commercialize space in India, is it going to be meaningful? So I would think that opening up foreign investment, as well as learning from other jurisdictions. So I know that, for example, the NASA does allocate some sort of a budget to actually invest in private participants. We don't have that happening here. I mean, the government does say that a huge portion of our budget is going to be allocated towards space activities, but then there is this whole fuzziness about what those activities are and what is the full extent to which I can go. And as far as technology transfers are concerned, and I've been saying this for a while, I do think that is really the place where the value lies. But the way that it's currently structured is simply a flow of that R&D research and know-how from ISRO to startups and other participants who sign up to these technology transfer agreements with them. But again, what you do with that technology is limited to what the regulation permits. So I would think that when I say multi-pronged, I mean foreign investment, sort of walk along with how telecom has been liberalized. Just 2 weeks back, the telecom sector has been liberalized, both in terms of ease of doing business, foreign investment, as well as, I think it was just a couple of days back now, the telecom licenses have been amended for VSAT operators to actually provide backhaul connectivity to telecom service providers.
I saw
So
that.
all of these, so all of these are steps in the right direction, but unless you move up on what's happening with remote sensing, or you move up with what's happening with space communications, it's not truly going to take effect. So as a legislator or somebody in the government or even in, in the industry, I would really push for it to be an effort that makes all of these relaxations meaningful, and to sort of move away from what ISRO has traditionally been doing. Because in terms of the formal arrangements, I've seen NDAs, I've seen broad MOUs and framework agreements, and I've seen technology transfers agreements. And that's the extent of PPP that exists today.
Interesting. Well, thank you for that. Dave, I want to come back to you as we close here, looking at it now from the perspective of your own specific endeavors at SpaceLink. From the perspective of moving a data relay startup service, a MEO operation forward, you mentioned you actually were very positive in speaking about the Space Act agreement and the comms aspect of it. Is there anywhere where government or regulators are still in your way and maybe prohibiting you from doing the types of things that you want to do on the technology side or the business execution side? You're laughing. Yeah.
Well, it's a great question, and I wish I had some dirt to dish to you.
Oh, I guess that's what I was looking for.
I know, but I to be fair, I've been extremely happy with the agencies that we've been working with, and let me start with the FCC. We had to go through a process where we transferred a license that the FCC had provided from the ITU to SpaceLink from another entity. We added spectrum to that process, and they've been working very closely with us, hand in hand, to make sure that we're getting what we need. So I've had a fantastic relationship with the FCC and of course the NTIA when it comes to some of the other frequency bands that we're looking to use, such as military Ka frequencies. So they've been great. And then on the NASA side, I must say that the Space Act agreement is kind of it's worked very well, and it's a great example of what I think government should be doing. Back when NASA was created, they were the only entity globally, except for possibly the Russians, that were interested in space and able to have the resources to be able to put assets in space and do the science missions. And they've done a great job of continuing on over the past 60 years that type of mission. But where it's made sense, they've privatized, they've gone commercial. Where it's made sense. And in our SpaceLink's particular market is a great example of how the market changed in general, and then how NASA has reacted appropriately. And what I'll say on that is, the TDRS system was to provide data relay communication systems primarily to other NASA assets in low Earth orbit, as well as other U.S. agency civil agency assets, and even some DoD assets in space, because the U.S. was the only people really in the United States. The government was the only group that was actually putting a lot of assets into low Earth orbit. Over the past 10 years, what we've seen with the reduction in launch costs, a lot of commercial applications that are now becoming possible and profitable to be operated in low Earth orbit. And I'll take remote sensing as a great example. Earth observation, you have the Black Skies, the Maxars of the world, Planet Labs. You're getting into the hyperspectral sensing satellites, moving towards synthetic aperture radar. These are all great applications that are now possible to be done commercially, other than governments in space. And then as the commercial opportunity has grown, NASA has realized that, hey, they'd probably be better off getting a commercial services provider to be able to get the communications they need for their assets, because there's a larger commercial market to take advantage And so it makes good sense at this time for them to go down their CSP program, which we hope to participate. And so I think it's a great example of how they are doing things well, and we hope to be a good provider to them ultimately.
Yeah. Just for the audience, Dave, the CSP program is what?
Yeah, the CSP program is the Communications Services Program, which is basically the commercialization of their data relay services. It's run out of NASA Glenn in Ohio, and it's a major program that is in their second phase right now. In fact, they've just taken proposals for their phase 2, which is demonstration programs that will be able to demonstrate against the different mission categories and requirements that they would like to ultimately see commercial providers provide. And so the CSP program has been another great example, just like the Commercial Crew Program and the Commercial Orbital Transportation System.
Yeah, they've really got their rhythm in terms of figuring this out, it sounds like. And it sounds like obviously you're happy about that, and it makes it easier for you to do business.
Agreed. It gives us a market, and ultimately we don't have to worry about competing with NASA. The TDRS, they can actually be a customer and allow us to provide better price services to them than they could achieve on their own.
Yeah, good for the market. Jay and Jayatsna, we're gonna close with you now. Following through on that, Jay, I can hear you kind of chomping at the bit and saying, and Jayatsna too, saying, boy, this would be a nice evolution for our fledgling space industry in India. Jay, first to you. I know you work an awful lot trying to form collaborations between the Indian and the United States industries. And to go back to the root canal analogy, it's kind of like pulling teeth sometimes. You don't want to pull the teeth, though. You want to leave the tooth in. That's the whole point of root canal. You want to keep the cultures in place, get, as you say, the optimized technologies, the best and brightest from both nations, agencies, working to produce the kinds of outcomes we want. After listening to Dave talk about, again, the ideal situation, where are you in terms of trying to maneuver the United States and India into at least some semblance of what should come next?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lou. Maybe you should have been a doctor instead. Never too late.
That's what my mother says. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to connect the dots here because you asked really a great question, but I want to go back to what Jayoshna was saying as well about examples or international best practices, and the two are actually the same. If you look at the US-India IT sector, I mean, it's truly synergistic in the way it operates. And the types of capabilities that India bring, technology, skill at scale, at cost, is really unique. And it's also a sector that governments traditionally have not been really active in terms of over-regulating or even investing in. And so if you were to take the IT sector and how it grows and expands, I think there's a lot of lessons learned there for a nascent commercial space sector, where you sort of let industry identify the market demand, capital finds the opportunity. They either buy, partner, or develop the technology to ultimately capture that demand. And that's what the IT industry does so well in India, not only in the core, ones and zeros and programming side, but also in sort of the engineering and design elements of that as well. And those are fundamentally the core skills that will be behind a successful commercial space industry. And so in that sense, I would look to US-India collaboration and synergy in the IT sector as a model for the potential and opportunity in the commercial space sectors. There's even some adjacent markets that are halfway between the two: geospatial, commercial weather, some drone systems, and those sorts of things actually are ancillary to both markets and might be a bridge to it. And so bottom line, I would look at what we do in the commercial arena, apply it to space. We need to bring in a commercial dialogue into the space conversations that currently, from a G2G point of view, are primarily driven by science and a few joint missions. And in that way, we can identify this true public-private partnership. What do the two governments bring to the table that the private sector can't? What can the private sector bring to the table so the government does not have to? And where can you find the right technology development, capital, and resources that both parties have, but optimize them going in both directions?
Right, right. Okay, Jayatsna, last word to you on this one, because again, it's been a nice segue all the way through. Jay's talking about, and Dave to some extent, but Jay mostly, an IT as a bridge to space. In the Indian example, I think in the United States they're kind of merged. They're kind of one. Dave would probably agree with that. Okay, it sounds reasonable. Good model. Let's look at it from the level that you work at. What are the complexities there? How could that come together? Could it come together, or gosh, we need to go back to the drawing board?
I think it will definitely help with some progress. And Jay is right. I think the IT industry has very organically grown into a symbiotic industry where the capabilities that India brings, along with all of the investments and progress and sophistication that some of the other jurisdictions bring, just sort of really nicely blend together. But again, my sort of concern, and I don't mean to sound too much of a pessimist here, but is even if we sort of relay this model into the space sector, my question is, what can you do with all of that technology that we bring to the table? Right. And for that, you need to allow private entities to be able to exploit space in the manner that it ought to be done, which ISRO and other governments don't do. So what I would think of, this is just an example, but I think that if it is sort of impossible to look at opening it up entirely to private players, maybe it may make sense to identify projects which you can invite private players into to provide very, very specific capabilities. And I'll give you an example. And again, I'm going back to telecom because I think that is a great example in terms of how it was a sector that was entirely monopolized by the government. But today we're in a very, very different place. And this is actually the BharatNet program, which is a program to bring internet connectivity to the remotest and rural areas of India. And this is something that the government is very, very actively doing, recognizing that the private players do have the efficiency, the expertise, and the capabilities to bring the quality of service and consumer experience that they need. And at the same time, what the government is doing is allowing access to all of these states in terms of all of the permissions that you need, the infrastructure, etc., to really come together as a project that speaks of true collaboration. So I was just sort of thinking out loud and on the fly. And if it seems too ominous for the government to open it up entirely to private participation, perhaps the way to go is to identify projects that would really speak to the capabilities and strengths of the private industry and allow them to participate and bring that to the table. So a project-wise approach is something that I've sort of been mulling over to see if it's more achievable given the tight regulatory framework that we do have.
So a project-by-project approach to test it that way and to move it along that way, is that?
Yeah, to at least start, because maybe that will just build the faith to see that this can truly be collaborative and there's no need to sort of hold on, or monopolize the sector in that manner.
I see. Now, would that set a precedent were it to be challenged legally? Would the courts in India who might be ruling on that say, well, you've got these examples, so there is precedent? Is that the thinking ultimately? And I'm trying to think like a lawyer, and I shouldn't do that, but.
No, I don't think that the courts will even, take any objection to this, leave alone bless it, because it is, the department that has the power to regulate the sector. And therefore, if they do take on projects that invites private participation, even though we don't have a specific regulatory framework for it, I don't see a challenge from a court or other legal perspective.
So if the government does it right, no need to even think about having it challenged. Okay. Well, I think that's a good way to end it, with a good idea. And, I want to thank all three of you. Going into this, I knew this was going to be a great conversation, but I knew that the subject was complex. But really and truly, you really pierced it. And I appreciate that so much. So thank you all for making the time for me today. That wraps up our conversation with Dave Bettinger, Jay Gullish, and Jayatsana Jayaram. SSPI thanks them. We'd like to hear your thoughts about this series and this topic. Send your comments to agomez@sspi.org. SSPI is the voice of the space and satellite professional, a professional whose work makes the world better every single minute of the day. To learn more about our Better Satellite World campaign and to see how brands like Artel benefit from it, go to bettersatelliteworld.com. If you are not a member of SSPI and would like to be, go to sspi.org. Dues are $100 a year US, and if you're a student, your membership is free. And follow us on Twitter at SSPI and check us out on LinkedIn and Facebook. For Space and Satellite Professionals International and our producer, Ana Gomez, I'm Lou Zaccarella. Let's make it a better satellite world. Take care, everybody.